So here we have Lisa Pugh interviewing the Universities of Wisconsin president, Jay Rothman. Jay Rothman, he came into power when the Board of Regents wanted to do like a freedom of expression survey, but it had like a right-wing tilt to it because the right dominates the narrative on freedom of speech conversations. And it had like $1 million donation from John Menard, the owner of the Menards company. There was controversy around that, and the board needed to hire a new president. And the board ended up hiring this man named Jay Rothman, who comes from the private sector, who's a lawyer. He graduated, I think, from UW Law School. Yeah, he'd been in the private sector for a while in the constitutional section, like freedom of speech and whatnot. So he comes into power, and his first big thing is to pass through this survey about freedom of expression. And it was so geared in a way to get the narrative that conservatives are afraid of speaking up on college campuses. That was the goal of it. And UW system did not have to do that survey. They should have let John Menard take his $1 million donation and do it privately. So that then if the legislature, which did try to use it against the UW and budget funding cycles, the UW could have been like, oh, well, that's clearly partisan and has a narrative because look whose name on it. John Menard's name is on it. But no, Jay Rothman's first thing was to legitimize that survey and put on the bottom, Universities of Wisconsin. Or University of Wisconsin system. Now that gives the legislature ammunition to be like, this is your survey, this is your data. So not a fan of Jay's beginning. We'll also say under him there's been branch campuses shutting down. It's not really a fault of his leadership because legislature's just been defunding higher ed for the past decade. But here we are, another budget cycle. Jay Rothman is asking for a historic amount of money. When I saw Tony Evers, he told me that he wrote this budget, so his $855 million budget ask is from Evers. Let's see what Jay Rothman has to say about the funding ask. So he's been traveling around making the case for his $855 million budget request, and he says that it is necessary to prevent tuition hikes and keep branch campuses open.
Numerous groups since the beginning of the year making the case for his $855 million budget request. While Republicans say that amount is unrealistic, Rothman says it is necessary to prevent tuition hikes and to keep remaining branch campuses from closing. We welcome President Rothman to Newsmakers.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today, Lisa.
What's been your biggest takeaway from these conversations you've been having?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway and the biggest shock that I get when I tell people Wisconsin is 43rd out of 50 in terms of public funding for its university system. And that's not the Wisconsin I knew. I grew up in the state my entire life, and education has been so important to be 43rd out of 50, particularly when we look at Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan are all in the top 10.
So are people
We're in the
shocked by
bottom
that
10.
when you
They are.
Yeah, that is shocking. Iowa gets more education than us is embarrassing.
I hear audible gasps when I say that, and that has surprised me. But I think it is reflective of where we stand and why we need to do something about that.
The last state biennial budget was a bit contentious for the Universities of Wisconsin system with this battle over diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know there's some movement on the federal and to talk about DEI. Do you think that the state has have you addressed state concerns over DEI?
You know, when I started about 2.5 years ago, one of the first things I did was I asked our chancellors, what do we want to do? What are we trying to achieve with our diversity and inclusion efforts? And really started there. And I think we concluded that the definition of diversity needs to be broader. It's not just typically, historically underrepresented groups. It's religious beliefs, it's political ideology, it's veteran status, it's disabled status, and really look at it on a much broader concept. But then we said it's about the individual, and it's about individual students and our students wanting to be successful. So from the time that we recruit them and their sense of belonging on our campus, which leads to their retention, graduation, and ultimately when they leave and go on to their careers, and we want them to be successful. So that's really what we focused on in terms of diversity.
So do you think you've addressed all the questions from state GOP on DEI?
I think we'll see as we go through this conversation, but that's been our focus. It's really about student success. And then the second component is really making sure that our students are having a level of cultural fluency when they graduate. And what I mean by that is that we all see the world from where we sit, and it's important to understand that people across the globe are going to view things differently. And we need to understand that, and how do we deal with that, and how do we approach that as our...
It's not only people across the globe, though. It's across county. I mean, across the state, across district, across city. But see, the UW can't be political because it's a state organization.
graduates compete in a global environment, which they will undoubtedly do.
Do you expect this year's budget process to be any easier than it was 2 years ago?
No.
You know, I think I'm encouraged by the support from Governor Evers of the universities of Wisconsin. I've had some productive conversations with legislators on both sides of the aisle, and we're going to continue those conversations because I come back to we're here to serve the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is in a war for talent. We are not graduating enough people right now to fill the jobs that our great employers in the state are creating. And if we don't fill those jobs are going to go elsewhere, outside of the state, never to return. And I think that's what our focus is. We are here to help Wisconsin win the war for talent, and we are hopeful that the legislature will view that as an important investment, not as an expenditure.
But you're not a job factory. I mean, they think they are, but you're not. Like the tech schools, that's a job factory. Now here, Rothman, I need to go back to when he was like, oh, I've had some productive conversation. No, it's not going to be different. It's not going to be different. Legislative website. Let's go to committees. Let's go to this assembly, the Senate committees. Let's go to education. Now, Wisconsin for the first time had an election on fair maps. The legislature is now, it's no longer 2/3 Republican, even though the state's notoriously famous for being a swing state, a purple state. But our legislature, because it's so gerrymandered from Scott Walker 12 years ago, and winning the legislature by gerrymandering the maps to crack and pack Democratic districts, have skewed Wisconsin state representation in Madison to be up to 2/3 Republican last year. But with the state Supreme Court race and Janet Protasewicz winning and turning the Supreme Court to a liberal majority, they heard a lawsuit about disenfranchisement from the horrendous, nationally famously gerrymandered state legislative maps got overturned, and Tony Evers wrote actually fair ones, like to where Evers would have won and Johnson would have won like districts because of how much more fair the maps are. But there hasn't been a full turnover because the assembly's up every 2 years, but in the Senate it's every 4. Everyone in the assembly was up, but half the Senate was up because they go by odd and even numbers, district numbers. So in 2026, you could see more flip blue in the Senate and in the assembly. So, right now, even though it's closer to balanced Dems and Republicans, the Republicans still have both chambers, so they get to make committees. And they did not make their committees representative of the new legislature. You have this guy, Republican, Republican, Republican. So that's 3 out of the 5 Republicans, and you have 2 Dems. And you have these big committees where it's still a majority Republican. Like, it doesn't even matter. Robin Vos is clinging onto that power. And the Republicans are seeing their time wane. That's why they've weaponized all these constitutional amendments. But anyways, gotta vote April 1.
Jobs are going to go elsewhere, outside of the state, never to return. And I think that's what our focus is. We are here to help Wisconsin win the war for talent, and we are hopeful that the legislature will view that as an important investment, not as an expenditure, but an important investment in the current generations of Wisconsinites and the future generations.
I know you've been talking a lot statewide about Wisconsin's ranking as 43rd in public funding for our university system. What's your case to the average taxpayer? If I don't have a campus in my backyard, why should I care about that ranking?
I think you would care about it for a couple of different reasons. One is opportunity and accessibility. And I'm not talking about, we have a huge need for nurses and teachers and engineers and data scientists. But I take one step further. What do you want for your children? What do you want for your grandchildren? What do you want for other family members? Do you want them to have the same opportunity that prior generations of Wisconsinites have? That's what we are advocating for. That's why we think this is important. And that's when I talk to people, have that conversation and say, listen, what do you want your kids to have? What do you want your grandkids to have?
Wisconsin.
He's talking about this like elusive idea of the past, like, oh, there used to be all these opportunities, but people don't know what that means. People don't know that in 1987, 50% of tuition for the universities of Wisconsin was covered by the state. And that was because of the Wisconsin idea. But the universities of Wisconsin have abandoned the Wisconsin idea, started by Van Hise, which this dude, his office is in Van Hise Tower. And Van Hise popularized the Wisconsin idea. Borders of the universities are the borders of the state. And that the beneficent influences of the University of Wisconsin system should reach every corner of the state, like educating the farmers, better farming practices, or filling engineering jobs, or our state legislature. Almost 65% of them attended a University of Wisconsin school.
We mentioned that various Republican leaders, including Speaker Vos and Leader Lemahue, have called that $850 million budget request unrealistic. What have your latest conversations with Republican leaders looked like?
I mean, I've had continuing good conversations with both the Speaker and Senator LeMahieu and others in the legislature, but I look at it from this standpoint. The universities of Wisconsin over a decade plus were, in my humble opinion, neglected in terms of funding. And we have.
They were not neglected. They were attacked. They were attacked.
Our tuition frozen for a decade. That has put us in a very difficult financial position. And all we're trying to do with the $855 million ask is get us to the national median, get Wisconsin to average. Under the circumstances, I don't think that's an unreasonable ask.
Are you seeing that legislators on both sides of the aisle are concerned about that ranking?
I think they are. I would certainly hope that they are. I mean, I think when I'm talking out in the public and I hear that audible gasp when people hear we're 43rd out of 50 in terms of our funding, that makes a difference. And it's not the ranking per se. It is what that ranking means. And it means a threat to accessibility. It means a threat to affordability for future students coming into the universities of Wisconsin. And one of the hallmarks of the universities of Wisconsin in its mission to support the state, it has been both accessible and affordable for our population. We want to make sure that that goes forward. And along those lines, I have said very publicly, if we do get $855 million, I will not recommend tuition increases for the 2 years of the biennium. We will not move to close any branch campuses that are otherwise slated for closure during that period of time.
Are those things at risk specifically?
That are otherwise slated for closing. So he's not trying to reverse tide on any of the branch campuses that might be at risk right now. And I'm looking at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville-Baraboo County. That one is, he wants it gone, even though it's like 50 minutes from UW-Madison and used to be in UW Extension. But the board, under a Scott Walker appointed board before Evers came in, split up UW Extension. It was like, here, we're going to partner where they are geographically with a home campus. And even though there's no like historical ties between these small campuses and the ones that they now bear the name of, like UW-Baraboo County is now UW-Platteville-Baraboo County, no ties there. It's hard to get from Platteville to Baraboo. It's not really close. Baraboo's closer to Madison than it is to Platteville. I believe that was done. Like, that was an attack. That was a way to split up and divide the system so that it would be easier to attack and shut down more access to higher ed.
Yes. They are at risk if we don't get funded at
That's
the level that we...
That's part of that contingency plan if your request...
If we have to, we're going to have to look at some things that, quite frankly, are painful for me to even think about, but necessary because ultimately I'm responsible for the financial viability and sustainability of our universities, and we'll take the steps that are necessary to ensure that we do that. But that will impact accessibility and it will impact affordability in ways that I don't think are in the best interest of our state.
There have been 2 straight years of enrollment.
They need to talk about the Wisconsin idea.
Increases across the system.
About affordability, accessibility, global competition. Is that really the winner? This dude needs to get out of Madison.
But I know that enrollment numbers for the universities of Wisconsin have been in a steady decline really since 2010. That's been some of the criticism from Republican leaders. They say that the universities of Wisconsin system hasn't...
2010, 2 years after the global recession. And when the Tea Party gained movement, and that was preyed on by the Koch brothers of Wisconsin, that then puppeted in Scott Walker to the governor and funded elections all over the state for Tea Party apologists, and came in and started saying, hey, we need to cut funding. Where do we cut funding? Social services, so that we can pay for tax cuts to the rich. And that's where the UW got hit. Those funding cuts came, and then people were like, well, I'm not going to go to school. Since fewer people went to school, the right was like, okay, then we're not going to fund the UW. Well, they don't fund the UW, enrollment goes down. So it's been a toxic cycle ever since.
Have you had any success in getting Republican support for the tuition promise this time around?
We're going to continue to have those conversations because, again, I think this is an investment in the future. And what I've talked to the legislators on both sides, I've talked about is that if you went to a University of Wisconsin institution 20 or 30 years ago, you had a tuition promise. You had a tuition promise because at that point the state was funding about 40% of our budget.
It cost less.
And now it was 18. So it cost less. There was an implied tuition promise there that doesn't exist today because of the different funding mechanisms. We are relying more on tuition than we ever have. Tuition is a greater part of our revenue than is the support from the state. But we are going to continue to work on enrollment. We introduced.
What about the direct admit?
That's where I was going.
The first class comes in this fall, and that's this proactive admission for high school students, right?
Correct. We had over 300 high schools participating across the state. We're going to try to grow that number. But 10 of our universities participated in it. And what it does is it students who are based on their high school GPA, and each university sets the standard that it wants to achieve, and ensuring that they've taken the prerequisite courses that are required, but are automatically enrolled in our institutions. And I've heard some great stories, because I've heard parents come and tell me, they said, my son was really disengaged from school. And then he got this letter, and he said, I'm going to college. I have the opportunity. They believe in me. They believe in me. They believe that I can be successful. I'm going to go.
So it could be some exciting enrollment numbers this fall.
I think there could be some exciting enrollment numbers.
What got me to go to college? I had one in my backyard, which is lucky. Now, people in Richland don't have that. People in Fond du Lac don't have that. Some people in the areas of Green Bay don't have that. So how is that direct admit really helping? I mean, I'm not gonna go for going against that, but the thing is, you need your brick and mortar schools.
But a direct admission program without a solid tuition promise is going to be as successful as it should be.
10 of 13 of public universities in the system were facing structural deficit 2 years ago. I know you recently reported that number is down to six.
Down to six.
Six with structural deficit. What types of changes are those universities having to make to reduce that deficit?
They're having to make anything from cost reductions and looking at what they're spending on supplies, to not filling vacancies, in some cases to having to lay people off, sometimes reducing the programs that they are offering. So our universities, some of them have had to make some very, very painful decisions.
I know that some students and faculty have talked about, they think there's too much emphasis on austerity measures, that those cuts have been too drastic. How do you respond to that?
I think, our universities for a long period of time had been spending more than they were bringing in a lot of cases, and you can't do that long term. And I came out of the private sector, and I understand that at the end of the day, you can't spend more than you bring in for a long period of time, and that's exactly what we were doing. All we're trying to do is get to a break-even spot. And I think that is important, because our responsibility is to ensure long-term sustainability. And we're going to have to deal with whatever funding levels we get. If we get additional funding, we will be able to make some investments that I think are necessary to be made. But at the same time, we have to remain vigilant on costs. This is not to solve our structural deficit problem. This is to give us investment to move forward. We have to continue to do work on and ensure that we are spending taxpayer dollars and tuition dollars wisely.
In 2023, I know the system brought in a consultant who reviewed.
Using funding wisely is when the universities of Wisconsin give incentives to the chancellors to raise enrollment, while the school is suffering deficits, fire their marketing, fire people in enrollment and recruiting. There was some administrative bloat, yeah. But also, funds weren't rising commensurate to inflation. So, I mean,
there's been a 30% increase in the number of STEM and healthcare graduates in the system, such that right now nearly 40% of our graduates are graduating with either degrees in STEM or healthcare. So we are responding to the marketplace. We want to do so in an even more disciplined manner. This is an evolution. This isn't a change. This isn't going from one direction to another. This is an evolution about how we look at our program array.
Which, that makes sense. So I get it is a response to the market. Like, if a legislator in his or her constituency, which elected them, are needing something, the universities of Wisconsin need to find out what that is so that they can supply it.
You believe that our current system is aligning with workforce needs appropriately?
I do. I mean, and I think we are continually evolving our program array to address the demand that's there in the marketplace, which I think is an important piece. But I think there's other things in our strategy. We have said we want our universities to define what their distinctive programs are, but at the same time, particularly the 10 regional comprehensives and our polytechnic, need to have that broader reach of programs because there are students who are going to be geographically limited to how far they can go. And if we're going to remain accessible to everyone in Wisconsin, we need to try to find the right balance. But we're also looking at...
See, I get where he's pushing like the accessible UW La Crosse getting an engineering program when you have Madison, Milwaukee, Platteville. But also go back to geographically limited. Was it like 6 branch campuses have closed? No, I'm not buying that. Not buying the geography, Ian.
The need for a liberal arts degree program. Is that something that is no longer needed in our society?
I would disagree with that relatively vehemently because, as I said earlier, we're producing and we're working to prepare students for jobs that do not yet exist. And you think about how AI is going to change our world. How do we look at that? But what a liberal arts degree, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a liberal arts major, but the ability to think critically, the ability to discern fact from fiction, the ability to problem solve, the ability to work in a team and on a collaborative basis, the ability to speak and write articulately are skill sets that you can transfer into a variety of different areas, depending on how things work. So I think a foundation of the liberal arts and having liberal arts classes are incredibly important. And then we've got to think about, we're not a vocational school. We are teaching people.
He is spitting here. The liberal arts is so important. It is about how you can reinvent yourself because getting a degree shows that you've learned how to learn. In the liberal arts, you learn so much. You learn how to critically analyze. You have to read so many different things, different material, analyze it, write about it, talk about it, discussing it with your classmates, working on group projects. The liberal arts shows you know how to communicate, collaborate, critically think, and analyze. It captures all those. It is perfect. That is what the University of Wisconsin system, the universities of Wisconsin, should be focusing on.
About the experience in the fine arts, and you think about that and about learning about the human condition and the human experience more generally. Those are valuable things for people to have. And I think that's where the liberal arts continue to be critical. When I sit back, though, and I step back and say, what is the most important skill set you can learn? And that is that critical thought.
You mentioned artificial intelligence. How are our universities preparing for changes related to AI?
I mean, we just...
This will be exciting. I wonder how his take has evolved because last I spoke with him, he thought AI was thinking. I mean, never. It's just a complex algorithm. Not thinking, Jay.
Just announced that the Regents just approved both a BA and a BS in artificial intelligence at La Crosse. I think they're going to be, certainly doing that more broadly. I look at it in a variety of ways. I think, one, our curriculum needs to evolve so it has principles of AI embedded in everything. Because if you're a political science major or a psychology major, you need to understand some of that just as much as if you're in computer science. Not at the same depth, but you need to understand that.
The Legislative Study Committee on the Future of the University of Wisconsin System. The committee also discussed ways to gather more information about students who leave before completing a degree. How big of a problem is student retention on the University of Wisconsin System campuses?
I think we are continuing to work to try to improve our retention rates. There are some students for whom they come and this just isn't for them. And we have to respect that and move on. But there are some students who we can help. And that's one of the things that we are focused on and providing incentives to chancellors to say, how do we do a better job on retention and then ultimately graduation?
That's what I was talking about.
Chancellors will have their raises tied to student retention numbers?
They will have a potential incentive payment tied to them hitting targets in terms of retention numbers. And it was something we wanted to try. We've got to be innovative. We've got to be different than we have been historically. This is one opportunity. We'll see how it works. I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all, but it is one measure that we're sending about the importance of retention. And obviously, it's not
I
just...
hate the chancellor incentive because it's the marketing and recruiting. They're the ones that get the students. It's also your advisors. My advisor has really helped me stay and get my degree. She's not there anymore, though. Chancellor is.
the chancellors who are involved in retention. It is the university in and of itself. But there are levers the chancellors can pull to try to drive that retention, and they understand the importance, and they always have understood the importance. But this is where some of the services that we need to be able to provide. We have students who are food insecure or housing insecure, or are a $200 car repair bill away from having to drop out. How can we help them, meet them halfway to make sure that they stay in school? Because it's...
How can the state help them? I don't know if you're in a position to really be helping disadvantaged students, Jay. It was 10 of the 13 schools were in a structural deficit, and now it's 6. The other one's having to do insane changes, ridiculous austerity measures. What can the financially troubled universities of Wisconsin do to provide help to troubled students? No, it's the state. What can the state do?
These aren't giveaways. These are students who are giving up the opportunity cost of going on to higher education, making the commitment to see it through because they know it can change the trajectory of their lives. And I think particularly about first-generation students who are walking into somewhat of an unknown, sometimes with support from their families, sometimes without support from their families. I've talked a lot about those students have more courage in their little finger than I think I have in my entire body, because they are making that leap of faith because they believe it will change the trajectory of their lives, and I believe that, and that's why I'm excited when you see them. But we've got to make sure we help them. We've got to make sure we're there for them.
More of those study recommendations also deal with transparency around how GPR funding is allocated across the system. Do you think the current process is fair and transparent?
I think part of the challenge with the current process is it's been there for a while, and I've only been here 2.5 years, but during that period of time, on an inflation-adjusted basis, our budgets have been contracting. So it is hard to reallocate when reallocating from one university is going to push another university over the edge. Secondly, it's a lot more complicated than I think people acknowledge, at least at first blush. It's not just on an FTE basis, because if you did it on a student FTE basis, it would be pretty easy. But you have to look beyond that. If you look at a Madison, for example, which is a research behemoth, I mean, just world-class research that's going on at the university in Madison, their funding and their cost structure is very different. You have to look at costs of programs that are being offered by the universities. You've got to look at, what kind of support systems do that particular set of students need? Where is the geographic location? And is that important for Wisconsin to have a university in that location? All of those have to factor into that allocation discussion. And again, it's something that if we were funded at that median level, we would have more ability to adjust judgment.
We started the show talking about your travel across the state advocating for the biennial budget request. I know last week you shared that you'll be delivering a letter with more than 800 signatures from supporters, including 19 business organizations. How is your advocacy for this biennial budget request different this time around?
I think that the last biennial budget, I had only been in my role for a limited period of time. And I think we really, as I've talked to more business people, and that's the area that I came out of and spent 35 years in, having a good understanding of the business community in the state of Wisconsin, and really started talking to them about, okay, what's important to you? What do you need? What do you need from us? How can we help support you? How can we help you as you try to grow your business? And it became just a natural that was where we would reach out. And I'm really pleased. We've got 19, and I think that number is going to continue to grow, chambers from the Madison Chamber of Commerce to MMAC and GMC and the Home Group in Milwaukee, but it's all across the state. It is all across the state where these chambers are coming from. And then the nearly 800 people who have signed individually, 500 of whom are affiliated with significant businesses across the state. And this is not just the large companies in Wisconsin. It's the smaller employers who still by and large employ more people than the larger ones do when they're aggregated. So it is really trying to build that grassroots support for the universities of Wisconsin. It's not for us. It's because we want to fulfill our mission to support the state.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, President Rothman. We'll be checking in with you throughout the budget.
Sounds good.
Should be focused. Be the Wisconsin idea. That's what I want. I want to go back. We need the Wisconsin idea. I remember Board of Regent members shutting that idea down for me because she was like, oh, well, you don't know about the Wisconsin idea. People didn't know about the Wisconsin idea almost a century ago. It's how people start talking about it and seeing it. They need to sell the Wisconsin idea. So there's Jay. I'm not really seeing a commitment to branch campuses, even if ones are on the chopping block. Some inconsistency mentioning geography, but his lobbying efforts, he thinks they're working. It's not going to be different. It will not be different in the debate come budget time. I'm locking that in. It won't be different. There will be funding withheld. There will be funding not given. Evers will have to use his veto. It's going to be messy. It will still be messy.